Definitely picked something up from his older brothers as Rankin, the circuit shot. Oh my! You have to pay for the price of admission.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Jack Ridenour and Sean Meyers.
And welcome back to another episode of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast here on the Westmoreland Sports Network's YouTube channel. Sean and Jack talking high school basketball. And Jack, we've now reached the playoffs. So from the last time we talked, the postseason brackets have been released. They've been out long enough that we're not really going to analyze them. But we did have a handful of games take place for Westmoreland County teams over the weekend and a lot more on the horizon. So quickly, before we jump into any of this, just talk about the excitement that comes with the playoffs and the by and large, one and done mentality, especially in the first round playoff games. You know, you lose, your season is done for good.
I mean, they say that this is where the real season begins, right? When the playoffs start. And I think that in some way, shape, or form, that's kind of true because you tend to see teams that have played well during the regular season. You can see the difference between a good regular season team and a good playoff team if they can just turn it up just a little bit more, crank it up an extra notch. And that's what you get in the playoffs. You always get great competitive basketball. And right now, I'm thrilled that we're just scratching the surface of it.
Well, that's a good point because this upcoming week, there's going to be some great games for some of the best Westmoreland County teams. We'll get into all the games that are forthcoming. It is a little bit of a weird time period for the show because we mentioned it was mostly teams finding out their postseason fate and then preparing for playoffs. We had 6 Westmoreland County teams that played over the weekend. So we'll touch on those games briefly, but we're not going to have our plays of the week or team of the week. So next week's show is going to be a little bit more of a traditional framework, I would say, for our show that we'll get to. But in the meantime, we do have some games that we want to touch on. We mentioned there were 6 Westmoreland County teams that suited up over the weekend. Unfortunately, those teams went just 2-4, so 4 of them saw their season end. And that includes the Bell Vernon area boys basketball team. They fell against South Allegheny, with the Gladiators prevailing 71-62. I thought for a while Bell Vernon was a team that was poised to make a postseason run. We saw them come on late last year and really take Laurel Highlands down to the wire. This year, they were rounding into form. In the second half of the season, they knocked off Uniontown. But for the second time, they lose against South Allegheny. Probably a disappointing season for BVA. The good news is they're returning just about everyone. So I think their biggest losses took place before the season when Quentin Martin and Braden Locks didn't play. Still a good season, but ultimately I think that there's some untapped potential there.
Well, I mean, we've mentioned it before with how those players are coming late from football, right? And they're rolling into basketball season. And you look at a player like Lonzo Wade, who eventually got into basketball form. But as we all probably know, it takes a little while for that to eventually get into full form. But I think that when you've got a team like Bell Vernon that scores so much, you're bound to give up so much. And you give up 71 points defensively, a lot of points to give up in a high school basketball game. Zion Moore did all he could with 22. But again, when you've got kind of that main scorer, and then you're thinking about the offense and you're trying to outscore the other opponent, sometimes defense gets lost. And I think that's how South Allegheny took advantage and they ran away with this one. They didn't blow out Bell Vernon by any means, but still, putting up 71 points in 4 quarters of basketball, 32 minutes of basketball, it's a lot of points.
And it's kind of an ironic bookend to the season for the Leopards. They opened with a loss, a narrow one against South Allegheny. That was, of course, non-section, didn't have any meaning, but this one had a lot of meaning as their season ends against the Gladiators. And speaking of Moore, very quickly, he's had 2 outstanding individual seasons with the Leopards after he transferred prior to his sophomore year. You feel like next year, it's going to be his time to establish himself, not as just one of the best scorers, which he's done, but one of the most dominant players that guides his team to a lot of success, including the postseason. So I think he's obviously had a great career to this point. Next year, it's going to be a real litmus test if he can get the entire team to a higher level. Well, the Southmoreland boys, they ran into a juggernaut, Jack. They fell against Montour, 71-44. It was one quarter that really changed the game. I know the Spartans have some incredibly talented players. Who is like almost 7 foot. I just saw him dunking on the baseline and some stuff you just don't see from most high school players. Good season for the Scotties, a great start, not the finish they wanted. And again, the third quarter really just was their undoing against Montour.
And they were close with Montour in the first half. I mean, they pulled within 2 at one point. But you mentioned I mean, when you've got a player that is 6'11", and Southmoreland, I think even can probably agree to this. They don't see that very often, right? That's not a type of player that they're going up against, if ever, during the season. So
you don't even see that very often at the collegiate level.
Exactly. So how do you game plan for that, right? And I think that is the big challenge for a team like Southmoreland is how do you get ready for something that before that game against Montour, you had never even thought of. It did not even cross your mind. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. You can try and double the post, triple the post, but at the end of the day, at the high school level, when you're 6'11", you just kind of throw your hands up if you're the defense and say, we'll make life hard, but that's all we can really do.
Yeah, and as good as he is, he's not even the leading scorer for Montour. So you take him away, and there's still other guys who can put the ball through the hoop. Certainly was a tough matchup for Frank Muccino's squad. The one thing I think they will look back and lament a little bit is the fact that they were the 14th seed, because when we looked at this team right around Christmas, we thought that they could definitely be a top 8 seed. And so things slipped a little bit. That affected their seeding. They got a really tough matchup. You think about future seasons, you want to make sure you take care of business in the regular season so that you don't see a team like Montour until maybe the semifinals. That's, I think, probably the biggest area that they'll think back and say we could have done a little bit better, dropping some games in section play in January and early February that ultimately cost them. Nonetheless, good season, and for a guy like Ty Keffer, what a career that he had with the Scotties. Definitely needs to be celebrated what he did throughout his time on the hardwood. The other Westmoreland County boys team, the one that did win, was Monessen, as the Greyhounds knock off Summit Academy 78-56. And year in and year out, Monessen just gets it done in Class 1A, one of the most storied programs in the entire WPIAL. On the girls' side, Jack, this was about as dominant as it gets. Greensburg Central Catholic 77, Northgate 10. And I'm not exaggerating when I say it wasn't as close as the final score indicated, because through 3 quarters, it was even more lopsided. And then the teams basically just played on even terms in the 4th quarter. The entire second half was under a running clock. 4 Centurions score in double figures. They get Kara Dupilka back from injury. They were as physically dominant as you can see at any level of basketball. And this team is clearly locked in right now for a deep run.
It was 59-5 at halftime. 59-5. I mean, that's an incredible feat for any team to do, but to do it in the playoffs when, like we've talked about, it's winner you go home. I mean, anything can happen. It's a brand new part of the season. And for them to do that and that dominating factor or facet, that just tells me that this is a team that's hungry, they're determined, and they're not letting anything get in their way, right? I mean, Maya Morgan with 20 points, Avery Davis had 15 points, and Erica Gribble, who is pretty much paced away the whole season, she only had 12 points. So when basically your leading scorer has the fewest out of the 4 because Kara Dupilka had 16, I mean, you've got to feel really, really good if you're GCC right now. And they forced Northgate into 30 turnovers, so they're doing it defensively. They're not just trying to outshoot the other team. They're trying to grind out each possession and really make this a quality game. And, you know, again, you look at that and you say 77-10, okay, I'm sure that at some point they probably started to take a little bit of the pressure off, but I don't really think so, right? I mean, when you're putting up that many points and you're limiting teams to that little of an outcome, I mean, I don't think that you're taking anything off the accelerator at all.
I believe they actually pitched a shutout in the 3rd quarter. You mentioned the halftime score, and then they threw up the goose egg for Northgate in that 3rd quarter. So again, 4th quarter, the game was so far beyond over. But through 3 quarters, it was even more dominating than what the final score indicated. So this team is locked in. Now, they're going to get Rochester. They should be heavy favorites against Rochester. Looking through the bracket, I don't know on that side of the bracket anyone who's really going to be able to slow them down. I think that they should, if they take care of their business, get to the championship with some relative ease. And that's not discrediting the other teams. It's just they've been that impressive that this is a team that I think last year motivated them because they did not reach the WPIAL championship. They came close, but they didn't reach the state championship either. So I think they came back and they brought back just about their whole team. Chris Scattell, their head coach, has them clearly laser focused on winning maybe 1, maybe 2 championships this year. So an impressive tone setter. I'm losing my voice already, Jack, early into the show. impressive tone setter for GCC. Unfortunately, they were the only team from Westmoreland County on the girls' side that won. Mount Pleasant fell 37-21 against South Park. The Vikings just really stifled offensively. They could not get it going. That was a low-scoring game throughout, and unfortunately for them, they went absolutely stone cold in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, they went scoreless for the final 13 minutes from the floor. That's a long time to not have any scoring at all. Good thing that you're getting your water there, Sean. It's a fast-paced show. We're going up and down the court right now. But when you go scoreless for that amount of time, it's hard to overcome. I don't care how close it is, how big of a blowout it might be. Not scoring a point for 13 minutes, that's a long time to go without any offense. And you know, not only that, but it carries over into the fourth quarter. They're outscored 13-3 in that quarter. They're outscored 23-8 in the second half. So again, we've mentioned it before. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. But for this Mount Pleasant team, they only graduate 2 seniors. So this is a team that reloads next year. They can bring back a lot of those players, obviously, from this year. And not to mention, these are players that probably are getting their first real taste of being in the playoffs. And now they can build on this. And we just talked about how GCC is kind of on their revenge tour right now. Mount Pleasant could very well do the same thing in a year or two from now, looking at it and saying, we only put up 21 points in a playoff game. We need to bounce back from this. I mean, I think this is a big motivating factor for this Mount Pleasant team to build on moving forward.
And I asked Scott Jacoby, and by the way, you could check out the interview I had with him, with Joe Salvino, with Frank Muccino. They're all up on our YouTube, and then we'll have plenty more to come this upcoming week with all the Westmoreland County teams set to embark on the postseason. And I said, you know, after graduating Tiffany Zellmore and some of the other players from last year, did you think your team would even be here? And he said, I didn't know. So the fact that they were able to get to the playoffs, it's an accomplishment and something that certainly can serve as a building block. I think you could say the same for Burrell. This was a terrific season for the Buccaneers girls. Unfortunately, it did not end the way they wanted to. They fell 49-34 against Keystone Oaks. So the Buccaneers season ends, but a banner year, and it's obviously some good signs because while losing that game, their leading scorer was a freshman. So I think the future awfully bright for the Buccaneers gals.
Yeah, McKenna Miller with those 13 points. And, you know, when you're doing that as a freshman in a WPIAL playoff game, your confidence is going to just skyrocket. And I'm sure coming into next year, this Burrell team's going to be very, very hungry. They're very youthful. I mean, the only player, Cassidy Lee, she didn't even play this year. She's the only senior on the roster. So, again, very similar to Mount Pleasant. It's a Burrell team that just reloads. And when you're reloading after a 16-5 year, I mean, I would be feeling really confident if I was those girls going into the fall time next year, getting ready for the season and saying, hey, we won 16 games as a young team. Imagine what we can do now with a whole year under our belt.
Yeah, it's got to be a little frustrating, too, to win 16 games and still end up in the 8-9 matchup. You hope if you win 16, you're definitely getting a home game. Not the case, but, I mean, the reality is they had a good season. They should be proud to make the playoffs. Ultimately, again, this now gives them something to build upon all throughout the offseason. That's it for all the games for Westmoreland County teams over the weekend. We got plenty more to get to that we'll highlight momentarily. But first, Jack, it is time for our weekly trivia question. Let's rehash last week's. Menneson's Lorenzo Gardner scored 64 points in a game a few Fridays ago, tied for third most ever in the WPIAL for boys basketball history. Who also scored 64 points, and it came against a Westmoreland County team a little more than a decade prior? The answer, Micah Mason of Highlands scored 64 against Valley in 2011. He is still very much involved in the basketball scene. Micah Mason, one of the best that the WPIAL has produced in a long, long time. Now, this week's trivia question. Greensburg Central Catholic boys are going to be playing this week. We'll talk about that momentarily, but I want to ask about their head coach, Christian Highland, because he has played as both a player and a coach in a WPIAL championship game with the Centurions. Which team did he face as a varsity player, and which team did he go against as a coach? If you want to submit your answer, tweet at us, message us on Instagram, on Facebook. You can comment on this YouTube video. If you want to show up at Jack's apartment and let him know personally, you can also do that. So yeah, plenty of methods to reach out via social media. But again, Christian Highland, as a player and a coach, who did he go against in the WPIAL championship game? Now let's look ahead at plenty of playoff action on the horizon. We will have first round or quarterfinals matchups upcoming this week. And on the boys' side, we'll begin on Monday, jam-packed. We are going to have 3 broadcasts of playoff basketball on WSN. In 5A, number 2, Franklin Regional hosting 15-seeded Meyers. In 3A, the number 7 York Cougars welcome the number 10 South Park Eagles. And number 5, Our Lady of the Sacred Heart against number 12 Dairy Area. That game will also broadcast, will be at Fox Chapel. Other games on Monday, number 12 Kiski Area at number 5 Peters, number 13 Penn Trafford at number 4 Thomas Jefferson. Those are 5A contests. Mount Pleasant, the number 13 seed at number 4 Neshannock, I should say, also in Class 3A. On Tuesday, Fraser, the number 15 seed at number 2 Greensburg Central Catholic, will have that broadcast. Sewickley Academy, the 11 seed at number 6 Jeanette. And then Wednesday, number 5 Union against number 4 Menneson. That will be a neutral site because that is a quarterfinals game, of course, on Wednesday. And for the girls' action, Monday, number 9 Jeanette at number 8 West Green, number 12 Leechburg at number 5 Menneson. Tuesday, number 12, Greater Latrobe at number 5, Armstrong. That is a 5A matchup, as is number 13, Penn Trafford, going against number 4, Lincoln Park. Number 9, Hopewell travels to Greensburg to play the Greensburg-Salem Golden Lions, who are seeded 8th. That is a 4A matchup. And number 11, Bell Vernon area at number 6, Knock. Wednesday, number 9, Rochester at number 1, Greensburg Central Catholic. We mentioned the Centurions and the Rams already advancing. That is a quarterfinals matchup at a neutral site. And Thursday, the quarterfinals, aka the beginning of the 6A girls playoffs, number 8 Seneca Valley at number 1 Norwin. That's a game we'll broadcast on WSN as well. And just to cap off a terrific week of basketball, we'll have college hoops on Saturday, Edinburgh at Seton Hill, a doubleheader, men's and women's on WSN. Jack, that's a mouthful, certainly, with all those games we highlighted. Some really, really good ones. What are you looking forward to?
You know, Sean, I was sitting here thinking about it. Kind of wish that we had, and obviously I know college basketball has the NCAA tournament coming up soon. Kind of wish we had a WSN high school bracketology or bracket challenge, right? That would be a blast, because I'm looking at this 12-5 game in Dairy Area and Alsh, and I think that the Trojans can get it done. I really do. I think that Nate Papuga, coming off the end of the season that he had, having 40-some points in a game towards the end of the year, you're riding high, you scored 1,000 points. You've got seniors around you. You've got good young talent. I think that Dairy Area can get it done against Alsh. Call me crazy, but I think
so does Tom Esposito, their head coach. I assure you of that.
Well, I'm sure Coach Espo and I would have a great conversation about that. But I'm really looking at that one, and then also the yacht game, right? I think that's going to be interesting to see. You know, Tara Crosby, such a big time name in the WPIAL, and then you look at the girls' side, and I think that Norwin and Seneca Valley intrigues me because Seneca Valley just played Norwin not that long ago in a close game. They probably dreaming about the different plays that went on in that game. And so I think that Seneca Valley can come into that game with a lot of momentum behind them. I'm not saying that they'll beat Norwin, but I do think that Norwin has to play much better than they played the last 2 weeks of the regular season to avoid that upset.
Absolutely. Plenty of good stuff that we will have on the horizon this week. Again, for those tuning in that had not heard yet, we will have playoff basketball broadcasts live on Westmoreland Sports Network Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, potentially beyond that as well, depending on how our teams do. It is a very big week for us here on WSN, so you want to stick around, check out the website every day, look at all the live broadcasts, which again, you can watch archived, and then all the articles that we will have on our website as well. That's going to do it for this edition. We'll be back next week. We will have our plays of the week. We've got a lot more to get to. We will have some meat on the bone next week. But for now, we'll put a bow on this one. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you again next week right here on our YouTube channel. It's the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast right here on WSN.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network.